Syllabus 1.2 has us really looking at how to create charts. So we're going to talk about a weekly time chart, and then we're going to use what we did in section 1.1 with percentages and do some calculations. And then really the big chart we're going to talk about is how do we create a pie chart. We're going to ignore the by hand. I'm going to show you how to do it in Excel and just do some calculations for the pie chart. So this lesson is a huge portion of the setup for your first project. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do in this project is to think about how you spend your time during the week and create some categories in there. Well, our author created these categories for their pretend student, that this particular student had class time, homework time, sleep, work, and other. Those were their main categories. So you can use these same ones for your own categories if you want, or you can create other things. Those of us that are parents might put in here like childcare, which is 24/7, honestly. But there are some times where you're multitasking, right? Or you might have those of you maybe that don't have children. Your other category could maybe be entertainment or whatever you come up with. That's up to you. So here is an example of a chart. Honestly, it's really difficult to read. What they did is they broke up 1 hour segments for each day, and then they have the 7 days of the week. And then for each hour segment, they put in a letter, O, S, H, etc., that corresponds to C was class time, H was homework, S was sleep, W was work, and O was other time. And then your job was to count up how many C's are there in this thing. Well, I feel like that's a totally tedious task. That's what we have robots for. And I went to the answer key, and this is what it ends up being. Class time, the students spent 15 hours in class time. For homework, they spent 32 hours. Boy, does that look like a 15? Let's try again. 15, that's better. Sleep, they did 54 hours. Work, they did 15, and other, they did 52. Now notice these hours are the weekly hours, okay? So this is the total number of hours devoted to each of these activities for 1 week. Well, what are we going to do with this? So before we think about how many hours are in that table, or before we do stuff with that table, let's decide how many total hours there should be for a week. So if you think carefully, we have 7 days per 1 week, and then each day has 24 hours. So I'm kind of giving you some foreshadowing of things to come. This is called unit analysis. Note, if we work with these days units, they cancel, and we'll be left with hours per 1 week. So then all we have to do is multiply the top times the top. In other words, this is 7 times 24. How many hours is that? And that's the number of hours we would expect there to be in 1 week. So let's just take a quick glance at Desmos again. We'll do this calculation. 7 times 24. I'm getting 168 hours per week. That's what we would expect for the sum of all of those hours in that table to be. So it turns out that most college advisors will tell you that a good rule of thumb is that you should study for 2 hours outside of class time. Well, we would just need to go back to our table and say, well, how many hours did the students spend in class time? Well, they spent 15 hours for class time. And then for that outside time, since we're just saying we have to do 2 hours per that, we're going to double this. And this is how many hours of study the student should be doing. Seems crazy. My professors did that. In fact, I had a class that I was not doing so great in, and I went and talked to the professor. And she said, well, you should be spending 2 hours a week for this studying, and then you should spend an extra 10 hours prepping for each exam. I ended up dropping that class, unfortunately, and took it later, but it was a tough class. Okay, so we want to go back to the table and decide, was this student actually spending that much time studying? And if you look at the homework category, they were spending 32 hours a week doing homework, which is study, by the way. specifically for math classes. So looking at the number of hours we would expect them to spend, 30 hours a week, they're actually spending 2 extra hours a week, so good for that student. All right, so now we're going to use our results to create a percentage that each of these categories represent. So in other words, what percent of the hours in the week are being spent? So remember, a percentage of a total, you divide the given number by the total. In other words, the way I talked about it is we're going to divide the part by the whole. Well, as we noted earlier, back in problem 4, the total number of hours in the week was 168 hours. So for the class, we were looking at 15 hours being spent a week in class. 15 divided by 168. We're going to do all these in Desmos in a second. For the homework, they spent 32 hours. So we're going to take 32 and divide by 168. That will get the decimal version of our percent. Sleep, they were spending 54 hours a week sleeping. And then work, they're spending a solid 15 hours a week working. I know there are many of you that are working full-time jobs, so this might be 60 hours if it's a crazy work job. Any of you in healthcare are probably spending like 90 hours a week, who knows? I sympathize with you, I really do. And finally 168. Now one thing we should note is that these top numbers, called the numerator, if we added them all up, we should get 168. Okay, so let's skip over to Desmos, and we're going to calculate each one of these percentages using Desmos. So recall, the way we calculate this is just do the 15 divided by 168. There's our value, and then we're going to do 32 divided by 168. There's the next one, and 54 divided by 168. 15 divided by 168, and finally 52 divided by 168. So there's all the decimal versions of our percentage. Now our author said round to the nearest percent. So what I'm going to do is write down a couple of these decimals on our paper, and then I'll do the rounding back on the other screen. So we had 0.08928. I'll do for that one. 190.48 for sleep. 0.3214 for work. I've got 0.08929. This top one should really be a 9 as well. And then other, we got 0.30952. Good enough. Okay, so here I've written them all down. Now remember, to take a decimal to a percent, we need to multiply by 100, which has the effect of moving it 2 places to the right, that decimal point. So if you look at this, note that rounding to the whole percent means when you have the decimal version of the percent, you're going to round to the second decimal place. That gets us the whole percent. So this first one is going to round to 9% because this 9 is a number larger than 5. The next one is going to round to 19%. Next one is going to round to 32%. And then another 9% here finally, and then a 31%. So these are the percentages that our student here is spending each week, the percent of their hours spent each week doing one of these 5 categories.